Saludos amigos de Radio Universidad y bienvenidos a Salvemos La Sinfónica. Mi nombre es 𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗃, músico de la Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico. Y hoy tendremos una edición un poco diferente de Salvemos la Sinfónica, una edición muy especial, en la cual contaremos con unos invitados distinguidos que también son músicos destacados, unos en representación de la Orquesta Sinfónica y otros de visita de una organización muy amiga de nosotros que se llama la International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians, también conocida como 𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏. El primer invitado es compañero de la orquesta. Él se llama Miguel Rivera Trinidad. Voy a hablar un poquito sobre él. Él es trombonista en la Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico, su segundo trombón. Es también profesor del Conservatorio de Música de Puerto Rico y de la Escuela Libre de Música de Cagua. Y tengo unos datos bien interesantes sobre su carrera musical. Miguel dio sus primeras notas en la Escuela Libre de Música Ernesto Ramos Antonini de San Juan y luego continuó estudios universitarios en la 𝗬𝗂𝗁𝗃𝗏𝗃 de la Universidad de Indiana. También ha ejecutado su instrumento en muchos países, incluyendo Estados Unidos, Canadá, Japón, Alemania, Portugal, Costa Rica, Francia, Colombia, entre otros. Miguel es también miembro fundador de la New World Symphony en Miami y fue trombonista principal en la Orquesta Sinfónica de Barcelona, en España. Miguel, muchísimas gracias por estar aquí.
Saludos, gracias por la invitación.
Un saludito a la audiencia.
Saludos a todos, espero que estén bien durante estos tiempos de pandemia, que es muy importante. La salud, lo más importante en estos momentos.
Muchas gracias, Miguel. Y nuestro próximo invitado viene de Michigan, es un músico de la Grand Rapids Symphony. Se trata del destacado trompista Paul Austin. Paul Austin es presidente de 𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏 desde el año 2017, pero ha estado activo en 𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏 y en otras conferencias de orquesta sinfónica desde muchísimo antes. Hoy, Paul disfruta una carrera multifacética como instrumentista orquestal, ejecutante de música de cámara y educador. Estudió en el Conservatorio de Música de la Universidad de Cincinnati y Tennessee Tech University. También cuenta con entrenamiento a nivel graduado del Banff Center for the Arts y recibió la beca Gilmore Emerging Artist del Kalamazoo Arts Council, con la cual pudo estudiar en Londres. Durante 20 años, Paul formó parte del Festival de Música de Cámara 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗃 como intérprete y como parte de su dirección administrativa. Paul, welcome to Salvemos La Sinfónica.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
We too are very glad that you are with us. And we'll talk a lot about 𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏, and maybe, I know you wrote a book about horn. If there are any horn students listening to, and we have some time, I'll check the title for you.
I'll get to blow my own horn. This
is
great.
Plug your book.
Yeah.
And our next guest is also a very special guest. El próximo invitado que tenemos se llama el señor Bruce Rich. Es músico de la North Carolina Symphony y tiene una muy interesante carrera. Él empezó en una orquesta sinfónica a los 15 años de edad, en la Virginia Symphony, convirtiéndose en el miembro más joven en la historia de esa orquesta. Luego estudió en el Curtis Institute of Music y el New England Conservatory of Music. Bruce ha tocado en festivales musicales tales como Tanglewood, Interlochen, el Grand Teton Music Festival y con las orquestas de Charleston, Jacksonville y Honolulu. En el año 2009, Bruce fue invitado a deponer ante el Congreso de los Estados Unidos durante una vista sobre el impacto de las artes y la industria de la música. Sus discursos y artículos han sido citados en muchos países y en la prensa estadounidense e internacional. Bruce también ha sido orador sobre la historia de las orquestas sinfónicas en la Colburn School of Music de Los Ángeles y la Universidad Roosevelt en Chicago, y ha participado de conferencias de orquestas en Europa. Bruce, it's good to have you here. Welcome to Salvemos La Sinfónica.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here and a great joy to be back in beautiful Puerto Rico.
Thank you. I know that you already enjoyed your past few days, and they'll be here all week helping us with the orchestra and visiting some music school. Yesterday we visited 𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 de Música in Caguas. We'll speak a little about that later. So, But now, seguimos con Salvemos la Sinfónica. Y por supuesto, el primer tema con el que empezamos este conservatorio, que está titulado Conversatorio sobre la permanencia y futuro de la Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico, es la siguiente pregunta, que Miguel nos va a ayudar con ella. ¿Qué es lo que queremos decir con Salvemos la Sinfónica, Miguel?
Salvemos la Sinfónica es una idea que surgió entre los músicos, nosotros los músicos, para ayudar a restablecer el presupuesto y la misión de nuestra orquesta. La Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico está atravesando por su mejor momento artístico en cuanto a calidad, en cuanto a público, y se evidencia con las críticas excelentes. Por otro lado, la misión de nuestra orquesta social, cultural, educativa es incalculable. Es algo que sobrepasa las barreras de lo que el gobierno pueda invertir. Nuestra orquesta, después del huracán María, asistió a los pueblos más necesitados, llevando víveres, llevando música, paz, sosiego, además de que los conciertos educativos que impactan a nuestros jóvenes siempre dejan huellas. Y eso es Salvemos la Sinfónica. Es un movimiento donde queremos envolver a todo el pueblo de Puerto Rico, y ahora estamos utilizando tenemos amigos internacionales como los compañeros que están visitándonos, y estamos envolviendo a estas personas para crear conciencia de la importancia de nuestra orquesta en Puerto Rico.
Excelente. And Paul, what does Save the Symphony mean for you? That slogan.
Save the Symphony is something that you must absolutely do. It's the quality of life in your community, and it's so thrilling to see the quality that you have here in Puerto Rico. We heard a rehearsal this week with the orchestra to get ready for this weekend's concerts to the 20th anniversary of the sad occasion of 9/11.
Yes.
And the fact that is something that you can have to represent the feelings of the people in your community to come together.
And Bruce, that slogan, you have been around many orchestras in the world, even in Europe and other countries. What does that slogan will mean to you? Save the symphony.
Well, it's very special here in Puerto Rico. You're right. I've traveled throughout the world, heard orchestras on many continents, many countries, and they're all very, very special to me. But I think the Puerto Rico Symphony and the musicians of the Puerto Rico Symphony are very, very close to my heart. I believe sincerely that of all the orchestras I know of in the world, no other orchestra is as important to its community and the service they provide than the musicians of the Puerto Rico Symphony. So saving this symphony and having the symphony grow and expand its mission is critically important. We really enjoyed the visit to the schools yesterday with the next generation of music students, and later on we'll talk more about that. And one of the most joyous experiences I've ever felt in listening to live music happened here in Puerto Rico, and I'll be eager to tell you more about that story.
Excellent. So in that regard, I will ask Miguel and each of you also this question. Miguel, ¿qué nos puedes decir en tu experiencia y en tu conocimiento personal sobre las contribuciones de las orquestas sinfónicas en general y la de Puerto Rico en específico a la comunidad, a la economía, la educación y cualquier otro aspecto de la sociedad? Ahorita, por ejemplo, hablaste de la gira y los esfuerzos que hicimos sobre el huracán, así que eso es parte de eso.
Correcto. Sí, empezamos por ahí. Social, cultural, la misión social y cultural de nuestra orquesta sobrepasa toda barrera. O sea, llegamos a sitios donde no llega nadie, en el sentido de que llegamos directamente por el oído al corazón de las personas. Esto lo dijo un gran filósofo alemán, Nietzsche: sin la música la vida sería un error. Yo creo en eso. Yo creo que la música puede arreglar todos los problemas del mundo, porque la música es el único idioma universal. Podemos tocar con personas de diferentes países, vamos a tocar exactamente la misma música. Hablando sobre la economía, que le preocupa un poquito más a nuestra Junta Fiscal, pues el turismo cultural genera billones de dólares. Nosotros realizamos un estudio con el economista 𝗀𝗶𝗰, que reflejó unos hallazgos interesantísimos. Por ejemplo, el Festival de Varsovia, de Chopin, generó más dinero que el Mundial de Fútbol de ese mismo año. Porque como más adelante el señor Bruce Rich nos va a hablar un poquitito más sobre eso, pero el turismo cultural, el turista cultural es una persona que llega al país y gasta dinero. Todas las personas que llegan a un país pueden ir a la playa, pueden ir a diferentes lugares, pero también van a gastar dinero en actividades culturales. Es por eso que es tan importante nuestra orquesta.
Gracias, Miguel. And Bruce, I have the same question for you too. I know you could be here an hour speaking to us about this question, which will be great if we had the time. So, what are the contributions of symphony orchestras to our community, the economy, education, and any other aspects of our society?
Well, it's very important, and it's great to have a chance to talk about it, because too often lost in the discussion about the arts is just exactly what the value are. And there are many things to talk about. I like to bring up the financial issues, because so often people talk about donating to the arts as if it's just donating or giving a gift. It's not. It's making an investment in your community where your children learn and where your families live. And just in terms of the finances, throughout America, the arts are a $166 billion economic activity every year. That's what it brings in. It leads to over 5 million jobs.
Yes.
And in terms of return to the community, every dollar that the government invests in the arts returns over $7 to the community. So from a sheer financial standpoint, the arts are simply good business. When we put on concerts, cab drivers work, restaurants are full. They're good business for the community. But I have to say, even though it is financially beneficial for the community to invest in the arts, that's not really the real reason to do it. The reason I feel to do it is just the investment in the future of what it means to have these gatherings in our city and to bring us all closer together at a time when so many things in the world are pulling us apart. The fact that we have a great symphony orchestra here in Puerto Rico that can bring us all together, and we should all come to the concerts because they're wonderful. I keep coming back to the island to hear these concerts. And the word that I use, I said it briefly when I met with the musicians last night, is joy. Of all the orchestras I've heard in the world, of all the wonderful places I've gotten to travel in the positions I've held, this is the most joyous. This brings me joy to be here in San Juan. And all of these things in terms of making sure the orchestra thrives, the greater the investment, the greater the return. And these musicians do so much for the community. Imagine the music students that we saw yesterday in the school and throughout the island, and what I saw in the symphonic experience a few years ago, which I'm looking forward to saying more about. None of that would be possible without these great world-class musicians. Many of them I've known since I was like 14 years old, I think. And so that's what it means to me. There are few phrases in all of the advocacy of the arts that mean more to me than Salvemos La Sinfónica.
Excellent. And Paul, what would you have to add to the importance of symphony orchestras to civilization? Let's put it that way.
Sure,
in general, you know.
Sure. One of my favorite quotes is actually from the legendary Spanish cellist Pablo Casals, someone known very well here in Puerto Rico. And my favorite quote is him saying, "Making music is what interests me, and what better instrument is there than an orchestra?" And the fact that his mother is from Puerto Rico, that he moved here in the 1950s and would take daily walks on the beach and just be so inspired by nature, the changing scenery with the sky and the water, and really being inspired to want to be able to have classical music here in Puerto Rico, founding the orchestra, founding the music school, and then fast forward to 60 plus years later that it is still flourishing under that time. And this is my first time in Puerto Rico. Bruce has always told me how special it is here, and I certainly hope this won't be my last time. What a unique and beautiful place this is.
Thank you, Paul. Miguel, abundando un poquito más sobre esas contribuciones en específico ahora de la Orquesta Sinfónica, nos gustaría que le recuerdes al público cuál fue la labor que realizó la orquesta en las últimas situaciones, ¿verdad?, que hemos tenido en Puerto Rico, empezando por el momento luego del huracán María, inclusive en los terremotos del año pasado.
Sí, son varias. Aparte de los huracanes que fueron María y y el otro, no recuerdo el nombre del otro huracán, creo que fue
Irma, que vino antes, sí.
Sí, Irma vino antes, luego María. Pues la orquesta, evidentemente muchos de nosotros afectados por el huracán, nos dimos a la tarea de tratar de llevar música a todos esos pueblos. Recuerdo perfectamente que el primer pueblo que fuimos fue 𝗀𝗏𝗏.
Sí.
𝗀𝗏𝗏, y mucha gente se nos acercó llorando de la emoción después de escuchar el concierto. En fin, hay tantas anécdotas, pero recuerdo una en particular de una persona que nos escribió y nos dijo que estaba pasando por una depresión, y ella sintió que la orquesta fue a salvarle la vida a ella, y nos lo escribió literalmente en su email, que la orquesta le salvó la vida. Ella tomó fuerzas, se mudó a los Estados Unidos porque ella había perdido todo. Claro. Y rehizo su vida y está muy bien, y siempre ha estado muy agradecida. Aparte de eso, yo creo que una de las cosas más importantes de nuestra orquesta es la misión educativa. O sea, nosotros tenemos un conservatorio de música donde estamos entrenando músicos profesionales. Estos músicos, si se gradúan y no tienen un taller donde pueden trabajar, ¿qué va a pasar? Si no salvamos la Sinfónica, ¿qué va a pasar con los estudiantes del Conservatorio de Música de Puerto Rico?
Así es, está todo conectado. And I think Paul and Bruce, you had a chance yesterday to see how part of that connection between the musical institutions in Puerto Rico, when you visited la Escuela Libre de Música 𝗦𝗶𝗃𝗄𝗏, there were many professors from the orchestra there. What was your impression of that connection between Libres de Música and the Conservatory and the Symphony? Have you seen that elsewhere in that way? Paul, if you want to start.
Sure, I'd be glad to. You know, it's so inspiring to see when a musician passes on that knowledge to the next generation, how very important that is to preserve what we love. And those children who are going to grow up to either be wonderful musicians or people who appreciate music. I know people who are in the medical field, but they have a strong interest in music because of their background that actually helps them in many areas. And I also love that I see many musicians in the Puerto Rico Symphony who are products of that school, and to see how it has completely blossomed and grown and continues on here. It's tremendous.
Thank you, Paul. And what about your impression, Bruce, of this connected system?
Well, it was deeply meaningful to me. It's true, orchestras throughout the world, we have this community of students that we reach, but a battle that is ongoing is to continue to invest in music in the schools. And I feel this very personally because, again, I look at what's happening in the world, and for me it seems like one of the answers is that music is such a critical part of education, and we have to so often fight to keep it in there, to keep it as essential in education. So to see it here, it's such an important part, an important role in the education process, and to be in a public school where so many students are playing this music. You know, I say this phrase that we live in a society where too often it's easier for a child to get a gun than a trumpet. And I think that is critical for our future in trying to bring us closer together as human beings in all ways, and nothing does that more universally than music. And here in Puerto Rico, it is such an important part of education, and to be able to walk through that school and to see the young people practicing outside, and even under COVID conditions, they were all being very, very careful, but also still participating in this joyful message of music, coming together in their youth and making friendships that will last them their whole life. It's profoundly meaningful and critically important for the future of our society, I deeply believe.
Thank you, Bruce. And Miguel, tú siendo profesor de esa misma escuela, la Libre de Música, y redondeando este tema, ahora que por fin volvieron a clases presenciales, ¿cómo se siente la facultad, la comunidad de la escuela? Vi, a pesar de las circunstancias, vi mucho entusiasmo ayer en la escuela.
Desde luego.
Sé que fue tan temprano como la semana pasada que comenzaron estas clases.
Se siente mucho mejor porque no hay nada que pueda reponer una clase presencial, desde luego. Las clases virtuales pues ayudaron, ¿no? Pero estar presente estar ayudando, saber que ese niño, ese estudiante está bien de salud, es muy importante, y todos evidentemente somos seres humanos que nos hace falta el calor humano.
Así es.
Tomando las debidas precauciones, pues en la escuela se está retomando básicamente la normalidad, aunque tenemos un repunte que tenemos que tener mucho cuidado, pero aparte de eso, muy bien. Se siente
Gracias,
muy bien.
Miguel. Y ahora, antes de irnos de pausa, unas preguntas interesantes que nunca hemos tratado en estos conversatorios. Y voy a empezar contigo, Miguel, precisamente. Las personas quizás no saben que nosotros somos parte de una federación de músicos que tiene una local en Puerto Rico que agrupa a los músicos de la orquesta. La pregunta es, ¿qué es la American Federation of Musicians y por qué es tan importante?
La American Federation of Musicians, nuestra local, que es la 555, es parte de la asociación de músicos más grande del mundo, que comprende todo Estados Unidos y Canadá, y hay miles y miles de miembros, incluyendo de la orquesta Grand Rapids, North Carolina, Chicago Symphony, New York Philharmonic, y la importancia de unirnos. Y yo siempre he dicho esto, que una persona sola jamás va a ser más poderosa y más fuerte que todos unidos. Y esa es la importancia, la unidad. Estar todos juntos apoyándose unos a otros.
Y para que tengan una idea, los radioescuchas, la American Federation of Musicians tiene locales a través de todo Estados Unidos, y muchas de las orquestas más importantes, sus músicos son miembros de esas locales, incluyendo en Los Ángeles, en Nueva York, en San Francisco, en Chicago. Y la labor que hacen por todos esos músicos a nivel internacional es bien importante, por preservar, ¿verdad?, sus condiciones de trabajo, sus derechos, y especialmente en estos tiempos de COVID. And a related question for you, Paul. We just spoke about what is the AFM. So this question is perfect for you because you're the president of 𝗀𝗃𝗃. So we'll start with you on that.
Sure.
What is the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians? What is 𝗀𝗃𝗃 and why is it important?
Sure, absolutely. I'm happy to talk about 𝗀𝗃𝗃, so get comfortable. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So 𝗀𝗃𝗃, you're right, International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians. It was founded about 60 years ago, in 1962. It's an organization today of 53 of the top orchestras in the United States and Puerto Rico, and we have nearly 4,000 musicians who have this as their primary job, to be able to perform classical music. The reason it came about was about around the early 1960s, musicians wanted to have a say in their contract, and that before then, the musicians had no say. All of a sudden, you were just told, here is your new contract for next year. Musicians want to be able to have a voice in that process, be able to be at the bargaining table, be able to say, this is what's important to us. And because of that, 𝗀𝗃𝗃 was founded. And it's such an important area right now for communication, be able to learn from one another. As you said, we talk about orchestras that are in the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Chicago Symphony, but also North Carolina Symphony, the Puerto Rico Symphony, Grand Rapids Symphony. We want to know exactly what's going on to be able to help and learn from one another. And the greatest way that we do that today that they couldn't do in the 1960s was our website. So www.𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃.org. We'll be able to have current news items to be able to see what is happening across the country.
And I think people should also know that there was an 𝗀𝗃𝗃 conference last August, and we were there at the conference, and it was a great experience. Actually, the Puerto Rico Symphony Orchestra was one of the projects of note that they featured.
Exactly.
So
it was really wonderful to host you in Pittsburgh, and you're right. Your project that you had done with the Symphony project was featured in our orchestra projects of note, along with other orchestras across the country. And it's really nice to maybe welcome you to the 60th conference, which will be next summer in Grand Rapids, my home.
Excellent.
Maybe one day here.
Yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope so. It's just the hurricanes.
Exactly.
Do anything. But hopefully we'll get around that someday.
Excellent.
And Bruce, this question is also great for you, because not only were you chairman of 𝗀𝗃𝗃 for 10 years, the longest serving 𝗀𝗃𝗃 chairman in 𝗀𝗃𝗃 history, you also wrote have a book about 𝗀𝗃𝗃 and the articles you've wrote in that journey with the organization. So tell us about your experience with 𝗀𝗃𝗃, what it meant to you, what you think should be 𝗏𝗏 towards the future.
Well, thank you for mentioning my book. It's true. I wrote a book. It's really a collection of the essays that I wrote over 10 years, and it's called Last Year's Words and Next Year's Voices, which I actually borrowed from a T.S. Eliot poem. The collection tells a story for me of learning over a 10-year period of time, where it starts chronologically. And I just, in traveling as I did and going to all the cities I did, I met with about 75% of the members of the North American orchestras. And of course across the world too, in Europe and Australia, and it tells what I've learned. And what I've learned about these musicians is that they're really incredible people. I've always thought of 𝗏𝗏 as this united network of friends. It's a phrase that I coined, but what it really means is that the musicians of the Puerto Rico Symphony are in an organization along with the musicians of the Chicago Symphony, and we are all connected throughout the world. Whenever any of us have some difficulties, we all stand up and assist each other. After the hurricane here in Maria,
Yes.
the other orchestras of 𝗏𝗏 joined under Paul's leadership, joined together to contribute, to make sure that everybody had some contributions. And that's important, but it's more important is to know that we're all do this together. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're all spreading a message of hope to a world that desperately needs it.
Yes.
I often think that when I'm performing, when I'm walking on stage in North Carolina, that my friends across the East Coast, and I know that soon on the West Coast, I know on the other side of the world, will be walking onto their stages to do the very same thing, to perform the very same music, and reach the same people in the same way. So 𝗏𝗏 has been critically important in terms of being an advocacy organization on behalf of the musicians, but now it's also become an advocacy organization on behalf of the music itself and the investment in the communities and what it means to future generations.
And I really have to jump in because
Yeah,
thank
sure.
you, Bruce, for
Of
reminding me, and what a great advocate you are. Remember that when 𝗏𝗏 was there for the Puerto Rico Symphony musicians after Maria, a few months later, you turned around and were present for the musicians in the Chicago Symphony during their labor action by sending a donation. So that was very powerful and tremendous that you did that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have to set the example. You know, if everyone of our brothers and our sisters in other orchestras who are in need, we have to help them, right?
Yeah.
That's part of what 𝗏𝗏 is. You know, we're a family.
But especially
Yeah.
at that moment when perhaps you didn't have electricity and you probably
yes.
were food insecure and didn't know about water, and you yet still sent
and
money.
many lost their homes
Absolutely.
of everything.
Yes.
We recognize that you weren't able to, and you were actually traveling to the different shelters to provide music, which actually helped people so much for their spirits and for healing. So thank you so much you've done in your community.
I just have to say to that, one of the ways I've been changed by in this role that I've held is I can't help but think that if all of humanity was as caring and generous as the musicians of 𝗏𝗏 and the musicians of our orchestras have been to each other, but also to their community. That's what the musicians do. They give, and they give constantly, and they give from morning, noon, and night.
Yes.
That's what musicians do. We give back to our communities, and through 𝗏𝗏 we've been able to come together to make sure that we support each other as well.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Y antes de irnos al break, la audiencia, para que estén al tanto, 𝗏𝗏 fue de gran ayuda para los músicos de la orquesta luego del huracán María. Especialmente algunos de nuestros miembros perdieron pérdida total sus hogares, sus propiedades, algunos con necesidades especiales de salud y otras situaciones. Y gracias a esa asistencia de la International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians pudimos salir adelante y estamos inmensamente agradecidos por ello. We're very thankful.
Thank you
for everything you've done for us. So, querida audiencia, ahora nos vamos a tomar un breve descanso. Regresaremos en breve con Salvemos la Sinfónica y más del conversatorio sobre la permanencia y futuro de la Sinfónica de Puerto Rico. Nos vemos pronto. Bueno, estamos aquí de vuelta en el segundo segmento del conversatorio Salvemos la Sinfónica, conversatorio sobre el futuro y la permanencia de la Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico. Y ahora en esta segunda parte vamos a bajar un poco más a fondo de la Orquesta Sinfónica y sus aportaciones, su historia, sus retos hacia el futuro. Y voy a empezar con Miguel Rivera. el representante de la Federación de Músicos que agrupa la orquesta, la AFM Local 555, y la pregunta es la siguiente. Miguel, ¿cómo ha evolucionado la Sinfónica de Puerto Rico desde su fundación?
Bueno, la Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico cumple 60 años desde su fundación. Para mí está atravesando por su mejor momento histórico. Lo evidencian las excelentes críticas y las nominaciones a Grammys. Hemos estrenado sinfonías de compositores puertorriqueños tales como Roberto Sierra. Una de ellas la grabamos para Naxos. Fue un disco que tuvo una nominación a Latin Grammy. Y yo entiendo que la orquesta hace muchísimo, pero podría hacer mucho más. Porque evidentemente tenemos que hablar de los recortes de presupuesto, claro, que en los últimos 8 años nos ha afectado grandemente, especialmente a los programas educativos y a los conciertos de la isla. Así que en parte pues hago un llamado a nuestros políticos y nuestros líderes que reconsideren siempre ayudarnos en cuanto al presupuesto, ya que la orquesta está evidenciado que da mucho más de lo que recibe. O sea, por la cantidad de dinero que se invierte, aporta mucho más a la comunidad y al pueblo de Puerto Rico.
Gracias, Miguel. And Bruce, you've been in Puerto Rico before, and you've seen the symphony at different times in the past 15, 20 years. From that experience and what you know about our history, what can you say about how the Puerto Rico Symphony has evolved over time and what you've seen recently too?
Well, the Puerto Rico Symphony is a great orchestra. First and foremost, we should say this. I've been able to hear orchestras throughout the world in cities large and small, and you have one of the world's greatest orchestras here. You also have the orchestra that I consider to be the most important to the community, as I've mentioned before. I know of no orchestra that is as close to the music students, as close to its audiences, who bring as much joy, at least to me when I'm listening, as the Puerto Rico Symphony. And I've been here now over a number of years, and every time I'm back, the orchestra is better and better, and the orchestra is so astute in identifying itself as essential to this community.
Yes, and Paul, this is your first time here, but from what you've known about the orchestra, is there anything that you could mention about its evolution over time?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We're happy that Puerto Rico Symphony Orchestra is a member of 𝗀𝗏𝗻, and you joined about 18 years ago in 2003, and I've heard so many wonderful things about this. I really wanted to experience this in person because I've actually been following your videos that you've been making with the Department of Tourism, and the one that I really keep coming back to is the one that features the art museum, and with the music that the musicians are playing from Haydn's Symphony No. 44, which is one of my favorites, and just the quality of the music, the quality of the stunning architecture of the building, the fact that your art museum features art from Puerto Rico, from going back for many, many centuries, is so powerful. And the fact that I don't know many 𝗀𝗏𝗻 orchestras who do that for their tourism area. And so this is an idea that the rest of us are going to be learning from you.
Excellent. And Miguel, en la misma línea, ¿qué has representado a través de los años la Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico como una oportunidad para los artistas locales e internacionales? Sabemos que hace 60 años la orquesta empezó, ¿verdad?, con artistas invitados por el maestro Casals, ¿verdad?
Correcto.
Con la idea de que en un momento dado esa orquesta fuera mayormente puertorriqueña, y creo que hemos logrado en gran medida.
El maestro Casals trajo los mejores músicos del mundo a Puerto Rico, y ellos fueron quienes sembraron, ¿verdad?, la semilla de lo que hoy día es la orquesta. La orquesta ahora comprende mayormente de puertorriqueños, diría que un 90% o más. Tenemos músicos que han venido a vivir y se han hecho puertorriqueños, que no, a pesar de no haber nacido aquí, ¿no? Pero entiendo que que la importancia de la orquesta trasciende las barreras de nuestra isla, o sea, los océanos, porque en la música podemos ir, hemos viajado, hemos ido a Carnegie Hall, hemos ido a España, hemos ido a Sudamérica y esperamos hacerlo nuevamente, ¿verdad? Cuando la pandemia pues cese un poco, ¿no? Pero la importancia de la orquesta es como un representante de nuestra cultura, de nuestra sociedad. Y como dije anteriormente, un pueblo sin música es un pueblo sin alma, ¿no? Que es importante preservarla, mantenerla y ayudarla.
Gracias, Miguel. And Bruce, what can you tell us about, from what you've seen, what has the Puerto Rico Symphony represented as a performing opportunity for local and international artists?
Well, I was thinking just now how innovative the musicians of the Puerto Rico Symphony are. It's true that you have developed so many techniques to get your message out and to reach out to the community that you have become your strongest advocates, and we need other advocates now too. We need more assistance from people in the island to understand how important it is. And I'll tell you now that of all these concerts I've heard over the world, obviously a few of them stand out. And my favorite one was here in San Juan in 2016. The most joyous concert I've ever heard was the culmination of the symphonic experience, which perhaps you might want to say a little bit about.
A la audiencia, estamos hablando del taller de experiencia sinfónica, que creo que cumple quizás 12 o 13 años, ¿verdad? Para esta fecha, aproximadamente. Y es un taller muy importante en donde estudiantes de diferentes instituciones libres de música, el Conservatorio de Música, inclusive otras instituciones hasta privadas, hacen un internado con los músicos de la orquesta por un periodo de tiempo y tocan con nosotros en un concierto, muchos de ellos su primera experiencia sinfónica en la vida, y previo a ello tienen varios talleres instrumentales que ofrecidos por los propios maestros de la Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico. Sí. Inclusive en la pandemia pudimos hacerlo y lo continuaremos haciendo.
Si me permites añadir, ya que he sido parte de los profesores de experiencia sinfónica, esta experiencia sinfónica ha marcado a estudiantes que ahora son miembros de la Orquesta Sinfónica. O sea, ellos han decidido ser músicos después de haber asistido a estos talleres.
Y sobre, do you have something to add?
I was just going to say, this concert will live in my mind and my heart forever. I've never been so close to the parents were there of the students. The students were there with the teachers. The teachers were so proud. And after the concert, it's in the symphonic world. After the concerts, we tend to leave pretty quickly. We play the concert and then we leave. And what was so amazing about this concert was the feeling of joy in the hall was no one wanted to leave. An hour and a half later, I'm still talking to parents on stage. The musicians are still working with their mentors. Young lives were changed that day. My life was changed that day. And I want to tell this story every chance I get, especially when I'm here in Puerto Rico, but I tell it all over the world. But the people of Puerto Rico and the power of Puerto Rico, the people that can really invest in this orchestra, that really need to hear the value of the money that is given to sustain this orchestra, it is such a great investment, and I've never experienced anything quite like that, and I'll tell that story for as long as I'm doing this.
Thank you, Bruce. And Paul, what has been your impression of the Puerto Rico Symphony Orchestra as a performing opportunity for not only our musicians but international musicians? I know you mentioned last year that when you saw the list of musicians for the Puerto Rico Symphony, you are surprised that most of them were actually from here. What do you have to...
Exactly, and that's really thrilling to see, because you do hope that when you're in training that you can give back to your community, and you certainly do. Every musician I have met in the Puerto Rico Symphony speaks of music with such passion and speaks of love for Puerto Rico so very well. I can tell there's so much civic pride, and what the rest of 𝗀𝗃𝗃 doesn't always see, because you are not physically within the 48 adjacent states, is the fact that we want to learn more about you, and the fact that we're here and highlighting you, and we see the artistic ambassadors that you are on behalf of your island to the rest of the world is really tremendous.
Thank you, Paul. And in a related questions to the projects that are close to the Puerto Rico Symphony, Paul, I might start with you.
Okay.
Yesterday we were seen an exhibit of Pablo Casals' period when he was living in the island and founded the orchestra. So what will you say about, and I know this is a Casals Festival is known internationally, what will you have to say about the relationship between the Puerto Rico Symphony and the Casals Festival from what you've...
Exactly. And Pablo Casals is really a legendary, known figure in the classical music world. You just mentioned his name, and everyone knows this. He has an important book out about musicianship, and people recognize the fact that he founded the orchestra here. That really brings their attention to the fact. And something I enjoyed last night at the rehearsal that I observed of the 𝗬𝗺 Requiem is that this orchestra, this piece does not include violin. So you really have the deep string section, and you have moments where the cellos really shine. And those moments when the cellos are coming through, I really thought of the pride of the fact that the founder of the orchestra, was a cellist, and so very well known.
And Bruce, you also got a chance to see the exhibit of Pablo Casals, a little bit of the history of his stay in Puerto Rico and his projects with the beginning to create the orchestra. What will you have to comment on that?
But just the history of this orchestra is so rich and so vibrant, just like the music of Puerto Rico is so rich and vibrant. And I was listening to Paul about the rehearsal last night because I was listening to her. I love listening to rehearsals. It's a unique opportunity. But again, I keep thinking about the world and where we are and the division that exists in the world. And last night, once again, just listening to the rehearsal, I felt the sense of peace. I was pulled together. I was listening to these musicians working together. That's what's so unique about what we do is that we come together and we have to play together in these parts. And especially coming up on the anniversary, the 20th anniversary of September 11th, this concert this Saturday night, I'm very excited about hearing for the 𝗬𝗺 Requiem. And I hope that people listening are planning to come. If you're not, I hope you'll consider it. I think it'd be a very, very, very meaningful way to experience this anniversary. And depending on when you're listening to this program, because I know it'll be online far after, let me encourage you to, whatever the next concert that you might be hearing will be equally meaningful as well. If you haven't been in that hall to experience these great musicians, I so hope you will. But please know that even if you haven't been in the hall, that you are benefiting from their work, because they are contributing something to the society that simply cannot be lost. It must be nurtured and it must be invested in.
And so there are some orchestras this weekend on Saturday, on that sad occasion, who'll be doing this. And that really tells you the importance of an orchestra to your community. We come together when we need to pay tribute for a moment of sadness. We come together in joyous moments during certain times of the year. And so that is a reflection of what we want to do. And that's why a symphony orchestra is so essential in your community.
Well, look at what you did after Maria. I mean, exactly. At a time there were many needs. There were many needs, but one of the needs was hope, and no one can provide hope greater than the musicians of the Puerto Rico Symphony, and that's a great testament. You were out at the time when you were all suffering losses as well. You were out giving hope to the community.
I have to add, because I said it in Spanish, that we received an email from a person. She said that she was in a deep depression in that time, and when we came out to play, she thought that we came for her, and she said it, she wrote it, that we saved her life.
Power of music.
That's very powerful.
That was a very emotional moment. And Miguel, para terminar de hablar del asunto del Casals, le decimos a la audiencia que el Festival Casals al principio era casi como un proyecto aparte de la orquesta, pero ahora hemos logrado que la orquesta sea la agrupación oficial del Festival Casals. ¿Puedes hablarnos un poco sobre la importancia de eso y de que continúe así en el futuro?
Nuestra Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico es el corazón y alma del Festival Casals. Todos los conciertos son interpretados por nuestra orquesta, la mayor cantidad de conciertos y claro, siempre hay orquestas invitadas y artistas invitados que son acompañados por nuestra orquesta y es un festival internacional que no se puede dejar caer tampoco, o sea, es importante y si no me equivoco, ahora mismo los fondos están un poquitito finos, si podemos decir.
Festival Casas es uno de los que
sí.
está
y nada, y una vez más exhortamos a nuestros gobernantes a rescatar la orquesta, a salvar nuestra orquesta sinfónica, por la importancia del festival.
Y ya que entramos en ese tema de los fondos, esta es una pregunta importante para que las personas entiendan cómo funciona, ¿verdad?, la corporación que administra la orquesta. ¿De dónde proviene el presupuesto operacional de la Orquesta Sinfónica de Puerto Rico? ¿Cómo funciona?
La orquesta funciona con fondos recurrentes del fondo general. La orquesta sí genera dinero, pero como todos sabemos, en lo que estamos viviendo en los últimos años, huracanes, terremotos, pandemia, pues la orquesta es muy difícil poder generar dinero cuando no podemos hacer conciertos presenciales donde se venden boletos. Por otro lado, la importancia de los conciertos educativos a la isla van más allá de todo esto y es por eso que la orquesta necesita que el gobierno asigne los fondos recurrentes para nosotros poder...
la palabra clave es esa, ¿verdad?
Exactamente.
Que no sea todos los años una incertidumbre.
Correcto.
And Bruce, we were talking about where the Puerto Rico Symphony Orchestra budget comes from, and telling the audience that it comes from the general budget of the Puerto Rican government because of a law that was put into effect like 4 decades ago, and even before there were in another structure. But I wanted to ask you about to compare what you know about the Puerto Rico Symphony and how it's managed and funded versus what happens with other orchestras of 𝗧𝗃. What will you comment on that? How are we alike? How are we different? How is that good? How is that could be better?
Well, it's unique. It's definitely unique. And in fact, the closest model to it might be the orchestra that I'm a member of in the North Carolina Symphony, where in a similar way, we were created under the Roosevelt programs, the 𝗬𝗃 in 1932. But in 1945, I believe it was, the legislature passed a law that it's become known as the Horn-Tootin bill in North Carolina. And that ensures that there'll be a North Carolina Symphony, but it's a fraction of the budget that comes from the state. And of course, as the budget has grown, that fraction has become less, although still critically important. Here, the orchestra relies much more on the funding from the government. And well, that's great. It's great that the government recognizes that it's important to have this, but also it is at times subject to political whims that we have to continue to be advocates on behalf of this money. And I mentioned it earlier, but it's worth mentioning again in this context that on average, across all of America, every dollar that the government invests in the arts returns $7 to the community. Now, that's the national average. Locally, there are studies that show it's much higher. I can name places where I know that return is actually $11. Now, very, very few things in life will give you that kind of return on your investment. And there is a tendency at times to think about, well, should government give money to the arts as if they're just giving it? Well, they're not. They're investing it. I would argue that one of the greatest investments and one of the greatest contributions that is made in government here is the amount given to the Puerto Rico Symphony, because in reality it's not a lot in the grand context of things. It's just not that much money, but it sustains this orchestra. If it could be increased, then the orchestra could do even more. It would be even a greater investment.
Of course.
But that is the message. It can't just be that it's a line item in the government tax. I saw a CNN study one time. Every now and then this gets a little confused. I saw a CNN study one time where 50% of Americans thought no, I'm sorry, much lower. They thought 50% of the budget. 7% of Americans thought that 50% of the federal budget was donated to the arts, which of course is incomprehensible because it is a fraction of a percent, almost unnoticeable. You know, I've told sometimes it's a little bit like wanting to save on your electric bill by unplugging your microwave. You know, you can't cut this with any substantial benefit. You know, it's the greatest the way to go. The greatest the way to enhance that to get a greater benefit is to increase the funding of the arts, and it's great that the government recognizes the importance of this orchestra, and they must continue to do so. But it'd be even greater if they understood how much more we could do, if it wasn't always a concern. You know,
Yes.
if there could be recurring funding that was invested, and so it would just be something that was in the budget that we all understood, and then the orchestra could truly plan ahead to invest even more in the next generation of Puerto Ricans.
Thank you, Bruce. Paul, would you have anything to add to?
Well, absolutely. And first of all, today Facebook announced that Bruce Ridge and I have been friends for 12 years today. And I just have to say that the reason I want to say that is because one of my favorite Bruce Ridge quotes, and I have been working with my colleague Bruce now for a long time, is when people ask, how can we afford an orchestra? His answer, he says, instead you should be asking, how can we not afford to have an orchestra? This is so important. And you're right, the model here is not good, it's not bad, it's just different from what some orchestras have. Most of our orchestras, about a third of the budget comes from ticket sales, and then also donations, investments, things like that. Very little come from government funding. In fact, my orchestra, the Grand Rapids Symphony, has almost no government funding, almost no state support. They have to do other things to do. But as Bruce said, if you could just have that money that you know will be there every year, that you don't have to go asking for it, and that those energies can be devoted into other projects, and that you can make your plans, that would be really, really ideal.
Thank you, Paul. Y ahora, Miguel, yo creo que es la pregunta más importante de Salvemos la Sinfónica y esas últimas tanto relacionadas. La condición presupuestaria de la orquesta ahora comparado con hace, digamos, 20 años o hasta 5 años, para que la gente sepa por qué tenemos que salvarla y qué es lo que está sucediendo, ¿no?
Se ha reducido a la mitad o hasta menos.
Exacto.
Y esto es crítico. El compañero acaba de decir que en algunas orquestas no tienen fondos del gobierno, pero al no tener fondos del gobierno tienen que subir los precios de los tickets. Nosotros, most of our concerts are free, and educational projects that we do, they are free, for free. So we need that funding from the government to do that. And I also need to add that some of the students that went to the Experiencia Sinfónica, they decided to be musicians during that period, during that week. And now some of them are even members of the orchestra.
Wow.
Y Miguel, como nos queda poco tiempo, quizás informar a la gente y el plan de pensión de nuestros músicos y su importancia. ¿Cuál es su situación?
Muy importante. El plan de pensión tiene un déficit millonario y vamos a estar haciendo unos conciertos para el plan de pensión y esperamos que nos apoyen las personas vayan a los conciertos y asistan, porque estos conciertos son muy importantes, pero además de eso necesitamos que nuestra administración haga un esfuerzo un poquito más allá de lo que han hecho y que nos ayude con este problema que tenemos.
Gracias.
En estos momentos.
Y sorry Bruce, para la audiencia, el plan de pensión es bien importante para los músicos porque ellos a veces están en la orquesta 30, 40 años. Correcto. Y es su único sustento, o sea que en el retiro, cuando ya físicamente no pueden seguir tocando, es bien importante que lo tengan disponible. And Bruce, you were going to add.
I was just going to add to just what was said a moment ago. It is so incredible. It shows the success and the vibrancy that the students want to become musicians, and that they've made it so far to be professional musicians of this level, because you have to be great to be in the Puerto Rico Symphony. But what is also true is that not all of them will be musicians, but all of them will be better citizens as a part of the experience. We know that students who study music are far more likely to stay in school, and that there are benefits from their music education that they'll carry with them to be whatever they are, doctors, lawyers, politicians, leaders. The leaders of the next generation will all have benefited from the experience that they were exposed to by these great teachers.
And I think we have 1 minute left. and there's so much more to talk about. But I've just, decirle a la audiencia, una de las preguntas que nos quedaba era, ¿cómo debemos reaccionar a la situación de la orquesta y a quién debe dirigir nuestro llamado? Pues pueden seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales a Tu Sinfónica o SPR y ver los esfuerzos que nosotros hemos hecho a través del tiempo hacia quienes dirigimos nuestro llamado Salvemos la Sinfónica y cómo el público nos ha apoyado en ese reclamo. Así que estén pendientes, visítenos, recuerden.
El website de los músicos de Orquesta Sinfónica.
Tu Sinfónica o SPR en Facebook, Instagram y Twitter. Síganos y por supuesto aquí en Radio Universidad en Salvemos la Sinfónica. And Paul and Bruce, we have a few seconds left, so I think I will do the farewell. And as you know, every time we do a conversatory about Save the Symphony, we try to say goodbye by saying just that, Salvemos la Sinfónica. So, first of all, thank you for being here. It is an honor to have you here. Y muchas gracias a Radio Universidad de Puerto Rico, que ha sido básicamente coproductor de este esfuerzo. Es la primera entrevista que hacemos para Salvemos la Sinfónica. Hasta ahora pues nos han escuchado tocar todos los domingos, pero ahora van a tener la oportunidad de algo distinto. Esperemos que sea el primero de muchas. Y tengo el logo acá de Radio Universidad, muy honrado de tenerlo. Además de músico, soy exalumno de aquí de la Universidad de Puerto Rico hace bastante tiempo. Así que gracias, Miguel, también por estar aquí. Thank you again to you both. And we're going to try it. Just like last year, but with better audio. So, I think I'm just going to give a cue.
Okay.
Maybe you can rehearse one time.
Yeah.
Salvemos la Sinfónica. Okay, let's try it. 3.
Salvemos la Sinfónica.
Hasta la semana que viene. Bye.
Bye.